Welcome to How Has the Pandemic Changed the Job Search? Part of Leadership Month 2021 presented by the USC Rossier School of Education. Please welcome the moderator for today's session, Lori Shreve Blake, Senior Director for Career Engagement at the USC Career Center.
Thank you so much, Nari, and welcome all to How Has the Pandemic Changed the Job Search? It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce two of our expert panelists for this afternoon. Our first panelist is Dr. Airies Davis, who is Executive in Residence, Adjunct Business Professor at Dominican University at the Brennan School of Business. Airies will give us a brief introduction and background of her professional life. Airies?
Hi, thank you so much, Lori. Thank you, Nari. Greetings, everyone. Hello, fellow Trojans. I am Dr. Airies Davis, class of 2016 from the EdD program at USC Rossier School of Education. By trade, I am a practitioner scholar. I bring about 15 years of experience in the space, coming from such companies as Deloitte, Merrill Lynch, Monster, the Career Board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm currently a coach at Better Up, which is the home of Prince Harry, as well as an executive in residence and adjunct business professor at Dominican University, Brennan School of Business. And then finally, my passion project is the creation of Workforce EQI, which is an organization that offers solutions around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, really to address emotions and issues in the workplace using emotional intelligence. So I am very excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Airies. And our second panelist for today is Mr. Brennan Johnson. He is the founder of Career Designer and a coach, and his company is Gallant Coaching. So Brennan, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Nari. Hi, everybody. My name is Brennan Johnson. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I am a career designer and coach through my business, Gallant Coaching. What I basically do is I work with people primarily from grad students all the way up through mid-level professionals to really design a career journey that, one, is more manageable for them, but two, also feels good. And so that ranges from things like helping them map out their strengths to helping them map out their goals and their values and things of that nature, all the way up through how do you negotiate a compensation package. And then once you land your role, how do you navigate that space into creating something that feels right for you so that you can continue to launch yourself into spaces that you want to be finding yourself in. So it's a very design oriented and design thinking based practice. And I love it. I love working with students. I love working with Rossier alum and USC alum. And I'm happy to be here. So it's good to see the fellow panelists here, and I'm happy to interact with you all.
So welcome again, Dr. Airies and Brennan, and thank you for those introductions. This particular session is going to be very fun in that we're going to hear from Rossier School of Education graduates about their challenges in terms of the job search during the pandemic. So prior to today's session, we spoke to a few graduates from Rossier to ask them about their experience job searching during the pandemic. We will share some of their responses via a short video clips throughout the session. And let's start with the first one, which is addressing the challenges that our graduates are facing in looking for work.
Actually, when the pandemic started back around March, and then we had to start looking for practicum sites and do the interviews, it was a little challenging because COVID had already been affecting people's lives and isolation and everything too. So then a lot of places for practicum sites had changes, at their sites. So, when I was trying to find, it was like, it was very difficult to find a practicum position. So I went ahead and I went and called every single agency that we had been given from our MFT program. And I asked them for any opportunities, and I'm very creative myself. So I was able to ask them, like, for maybe be a Spanish therapist or translator. At least I would be in the session and gaining some of that therapeutic experience. But fortunately, I was able to land 3 different practicum sites.
In the beginning, I thought everything was going to be normal. It was fine. I was going to think about, like, should I relocate somewhere? What are my options? Do I want to stay in SoCal? Do I want to go up north? Do I want to expand to like the East Coast? Because we didn't think too much about the pandemic in the beginning, especially in that second semester, like around February, January of 2020. I started thinking more intently of like, okay, if I need to be in person, like, what does that look like? What are the things that I need to look for? What are remote roles? But there's nothing out there currently that says remote. So everything was just kind of a question mark, kind of up in the air, because a lot of schools were also trying to figure out like what exactly they wanted to do. And a lot of them had not updated their postings, which was another challenge, is like just kind of being in the unknown, kind of blindly applying to something and not really sure if something was going to either be remote or still continue in person. Would we need to be remote if this pandemic ended? So there was just a lot of uncertainty, but I definitely had to limit and narrow my search very much more to just Southern California, because it was uncertain whether this was going to end.
Just for me, were like not being able to go to a job fair or networking events or seminars in person, where I could get potential employers and get my physical copy of my resume to employers. So the way I altered my original job search strategy was like signing up for notifications for virtual career fairs. I updated my LinkedIn profile to include keywords that the educational industry is demanding currently. And I asked a few professors to write a recommendation for me for LinkedIn and to provide me a PDF as well that I can circulate to prospective employers. I looked at sites that districts use to vet their candidates, and I created profiles there. And then I created a job searching template to help keep myself organized. So this template had job title, description, date applied, the principal's name and their email address, the school's website, a follow-up date to follow up if I hadn't heard back from them, and then a special notes section. And then I also have all of my teacher application materials in one folder so I can quickly access them so I could submit to online portals. That also included some teaching videos that I had. So those MP4 files were ready and set to go for when it was made it easier to quickly apply to some of these really long, application portals.
Wonderful. Wow. Well, those were some great experiences from Jessica, April, and Melissa. We'll start with Airies. What are some of the challenges that you've seen that the pandemic has created as it relates to job seekers over the past year and a half?
I like that question, Lori, because I know that we all have experienced a huge amount of emotional toil with these overlapping crises, albeit from the disparities around race, economic, social, economic, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think hearing from real students' perspectives is a great way that Rossier has engaged us in conversation. So I just want to kind of put a +1 on that, and kudos to Matt and team just for introducing that, because I think it's good to have that real experience. But to specifically answer your question, without repeating a lot of what you heard from the participants, I just want those in the audience to think of it this way. There are, I would say, 2 challenges that are happening, and the challenges are between the organizations and the job seekers that are going through this shift or change, and some people call it the next normal. And so some of the things that have come up as a result of it, think of it in these 2 fashions. Again, you as a job seeker, and then the organization. So from an organizational stance, organizations are now having to grapple with hybrid work schedules, capacity workflow technology adaptation, collaborative spaces, et cetera. And then for you as job seekers, what I've noticed is relationship building is absent. And so how do we kind of build and foster genuine and authentic and trusted relationships in environments that may be a hybrid or on-site or off-site? The technology gap, I think that's a huge part of what I'm noticing as well. How are you making sure that people are up to par and up to speed in order to be competitive in the workforce? The flexibility, the uncertainty of what's next, the adaptation of automation and new technology. Again, I think those are some of the things that I've observed, especially as of late, without, again, repeating some of the things that I heard from the other participants.
Thanks, Airies. And what about you, Brandon? What have you seen? Anything different?
Thanks, Lori. And thank you, Dr. Airies, for sharing that. I think I would echo all of that. And what I would add is two things that I've seen primarily from my clients that I've been working with. One of them is sort of more mechanical, and the other is a little bit more personal. And I'll start with the mechanical one. The mechanical one is sort of like the elephant in the room, and that's the hiring freezes. And like a lot of the companies, schools, businesses, as a result of the pandemic, suffered budget cuts. And due to those budget cuts, they had to stop a lot of their hiring processes. And candidates were in the middle of their interview processes and were told, hey, sorry, we're gonna have to postpone this, or we're gonna have to pause this, or just cancel it outright. And there was a lot of that going on, especially in the higher education spaces. And that created a barrier to students, but as well to professionals, in that, well, I don't know who's hiring. I don't even know where to look, because I know there's widespread hiring freezes. Like no one seems to be hiring, so I don't even know what to do. It had a sort of like stilling kind of effect. And then the other thing that I would kind of want to touch on a little bit is motivation. I think that like it's certainly worth it to kind of highlight the mental health impact that COVID had on all of us. I think that what I've seen in a number of my clients is they just don't feel good. Like they don't feel like they have the energy to do it. They don't feel like they have the motivation to do it, whether that be because they themselves don't feel qualified, or because they feel like it's hopeless because no one is hiring, is sort of the idea behind it. So yeah, there was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of depression. A lot of people, remember, were furloughed or laid off. And some of these people had families and things like that. And so this took a huge mental toll on people's emotional energy. And I think that created a large challenge that a lot of the workforce was trying to figure out how to navigate in a brand new way.
And are you seeing changes now that we are trying to emerge from the pandemic, Brandon and Airies? Have you seen any uptick or changes in terms of job opportunities and what's out there in the landscape?
I would say I have. Yeah, I think that for one, morale is improving overall in terms of just our ability to combat COVID. And I think that has translated into people being more active in their job searches and in their pursuits. I think that also what's important to note is what's also gone up at the same time is companies are hiring more again. There have been multiple reports that have shown that, like June, for example, was a record month for hiring as it relates to the shutdown up until now, and even compared to some of the months before that. So I would say that I've seen a change. I think it's slow going. I think it's going to be a process to kind of get people back in the zone, if you will, in terms of their hiring processes and managing that. But I have seen change, yeah.
Airies, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would just plus one Brandon's point and just say that in addition to the mental and the physical well-being and the burnout and the toxicity that some individuals have experienced as a result of the transition, the other thing that you should note is that you are the prize. There's a term that a gentleman, a professor by the name of Anthony Klotz coined, is called the Great Resignation. And what you're seeing right now, in tandem to what Brandon shared about the uptick of employers seeking employees, is that there are a lot of people who are just simply making decisions to move into their passion projects, as I mentioned earlier, simply because they have the capacity and the ability to do it right now. If you ever wanted to start a school, or if you ever wanted to be a superintendent, like whatever it is that goal or objective, I think that is something that you're also seeing, because again, the market calls for it. This idea of solopreneurship and entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, where you're actually working inside an organization. So all of these things are definitely very prevalent.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we next asked our recent graduates to share their experience and advice around virtual job interviews. So we have a video to show you.
I think one thing that stuck out to me was, well, two things actually. Number one was just trying to get an understanding of like what people were like, because when I was interviewing, it was like the beginning of the pandemic. Over time we've kind of learned how to be ourselves, but with video, I've never done a virtual interview before. So the first few that I have, I was like, where do I set up? How do I completely comfortably be myself and at the same time share what I am capable of, right? And so reading people, their body language, like you only see half of their body or their face. And a lot of the time they're taking notes, so you're not really sure if they're like reacting or what their opinion is. And so that was a little nerve-wracking for me, because I really vibe off people's energies. The second thing was just figuring out, where do I set up? I live in a house with 5 other people, which consists of like 3 different generations. So there's a lot of activity in my house. Thankfully, I'm in a room right now where there's like minimal noise, but when I was trying to figure out where to interview, I had no idea where to go. I had to figure out like what a good height setup was for my laptop. What do I wear? What is appropriate? What do I have in my background if it's appropriate? And then also just like, if my computer were to die or lose connection, like how do I go from there? In my interview, actually, for the job I currently have, my computer died on me and lost connection from the interview. So I had to quickly pivot to my phone to do my initial interview. And so one piece of advice I would have is just having backup tech.
And one of the things I did too was read as much as I can from at least 2 to 3 sites on that school or company. And I made notes of the important findings from that. And I, had a Google Doc that I could reference during the interview. And I looked at the school website and 2 other sites. I reviewed their most recent newsletter to get an idea of what are they highlighting as their main priorities. I reviewed what parents and students were saying about the school. And I just looked at how the school was structured. And then I made sure I had a list of questions ready, and I had those questions organized as well, so that on the day of the interview, I was ready when it was my turn for me to then ask questions of the interviewers.
Wonderful. So it sounds like they had a plan in place. So Brandon, we'll start with you. What advice do you give the people that you're coaching, your clients, to help them prepare and stand out in a virtual interview?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Interviews are funny to me because they're like one thing that everyone loves getting and like no one loves doing. So it's like this really quick shift from, yes, I'm so excited, I got an interview, to like, oh my God, I'm filled with dread right now, I don't know what to do. But I think the individuals in the videos said some really good things. There's sort of this aspect of sticking to the basics and what you would do in ordinary circumstances. Like they talked about doing your homework, doing your research. So like knowing the names and the places. I always say like show up early. Get there early, so that way you have time to kind of settle in a little bit. I like that they also mentioned testing the technology. So knowing where you want to be, making sure that you're minimizing distractions, both for you and for your interviewers. So making sure that you're kind of like scouting that sort of thing out. The one thing that I emphasize heavily now, especially heavily now, is engage. In a virtual environment, it's so much easier to disengage and disconnect because you're not there with them in person. Like it's easy to look away or look at your phone or an email pops up or something like that. It's easy to disengage. And the thing about it is there's a sort of there's a number of parallels that exist between the interview space and the on the job space. And one of those parallels being if an interviewer or a hiring manager views you as engaging in the interview, they will envision you as an engaging and an engaged employee on the job. And so you want to take care to make sure that you're doing your best to engage in the interviews and to make it as conversational as you can. And when it comes time to ask questions, ask your questions at the end of the interview, make sure you've done your research well enough to be able to ask really engaging questions and have a really good conversation. If I could share a quick example, in some of my prior capacities, I've facilitated a number of hiring processes. And I can remember one candidate in particular who did not have a good interview. It was not a good interview. It was like a 45-minute interview that lasted 9 minutes. And at the end of it, though, this individual had such great questions and such great conversation that what it showed me was, oh, wow, like this person is actually a great candidate. Like they have really good experiences. They're super engaging. It just didn't really come out in the interview, but they did a great job engaging me throughout the latter half of it. I think I actually want to see this person again in the next stage. And it was all because they were just really engaging. And they did a really good job at doing that towards the end. So engage, and part of that is you got to practice. You got to know what you want to say. You got to know how you want to organize your thoughts and communicate your messages so that you can do that in a way that is engaging. And so practice, practice, practice. And remember, bring your personality with you.
That's right. I love that. Dr. Airies, do you have something to add?
Just two really quick points. One, ask yourself, what do you want to be known for? So it's almost about your branding statement. And I think that helps to kind of lead and guide your conversation so that you can stand out. And so if you go in with that as your thought process before you even start in terms of the preparedness, it helps you to really kind of level set and come up with creative ways to share stories, share experiences that relate to the professional and also personal expertise that you're bringing to the table. Bring your personality. Like behind me, I have artifacts and things like that. And sometimes that comes up as a point of discussion in the interview. So think about that, especially if you're doing the online interviewing format. Also think about why should you work for them and why you should bring again those talents to their organization, because again, you are the prize. I just want to make sure that that is emphasized. The other point that I heard, and I think is important for us to also note in terms of the second piece of the puzzle, is the format of the interview. Always ask, what is the format? And here's why. There are about 3 to 4, possibly even 5 now types of online interviewing formats. There is, and I won't go through each one, but I'll just share with you the ones that are more common. But sometimes there's a panel interview. So you may expect this one person in the video screen and you get on the screen and there's about 5 or 6 people looking at you. Sometimes there's group interviews where you're actually interviewing with your peers at the same time. And that can happen online and also offline. There's also moments where, again, they may have like these practice tests or these demos or other ways that they want you to kind of show your talents. And so I would just say, ask the format, and then also be prepared with your branding statement or pretty much why you should work for them and why you are, again, the prize.
And I love what you said. I wrote that down. You are the prize. There still is a war for talent. People need, companies, organizations cannot move forward without people. And so, and the other thing that I love to say about an interview, whether it's virtual or in person, the interview is not a monologue, it's a dialogue. So you're wanting to make sure they're the right fit for you as well. So next up, the pandemic saw a rise in the demand for employers wanting particular skills. Let's hear what our recent graduates learned during their job search.
I feel like this, especially for the positions I was applying for, it was the same skill set. It was just you were having to execute them in a new fashion. So for me, like I was interested in mostly a lot of advising experience, like academic advising or like student leaders, like advising. And so for those, instead of the traditional outlet was being an in-person where students would come in for meetings in person, it was now having to do it virtually. And so trying to be able to have like good communication skills virtually to be able to connect with students and being able to build good relations with them. I think if there was something that is particularly important, which could technically be applicable in any position, is like digital marketing or like website-based skills. That was something that we heavily emphasized in my assistantship when we transitioned from in-person to online. We did a lot more of like online branding. We did a lot more resources where we showcased them online. So it was like through recorded virtual workshops or promoting on like social media or really strengthening our website. I think those are things that employers could be potentially looking for a little bit more.
Flexibility is something every employer is looking for. Now they want people who can adapt to unknown situations. And it's just, this past year has taught us that you kind of need to do that to survive and flourish. I have a sense my employers were looking for relational people. It seems as if they cared about how I would relate to others and problem solve. So that was something I didn't expect because it was a lot of questions about communication skills and how I develop relationships.
I heavily emphasized on a lot of my marketing strategies. So when you're an event planner, you also have to, especially for student activities, you have to think about like, how do we virtually engage these students? Thankfully, in my previous experiences, I've developed a lot of marketing. That was part of my role. I was also just super involved in technology. So social media was definitely one that I leveraged very heavily, like using Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, now Discord, Clubhouse, still trying to figure out and understand TikTok, but it's those social media platforms that I was like, I'm able to, utilize these tools. This can help, increasing engagement and getting to know not just like students, but also the general community and just keeping everyone in the loop of like, okay, what's our office doing?
Those were some great insights from Whitney, Karen, and April. Airies and Brandon, what are your thoughts on new skills employers are emphasizing? And we'll start with Dr. Airies.
So I'm big on research, obviously. So I looked at a recent report, and now there are tons and tons and tons of reports. So I would first say arm yourself with the research and go back to what some of the data is saying. So there was one report from Degreed, and it was an article called In Demand Skills 2021. And it was an article that said the top 2 skills that are in demand, and that's globally, and that's across all industries, skill sets, et cetera. So if you're from education, business, whatever your sector of expertise, the same still applies. And these 2 skills, so I know everyone's anxious to hear these 2 skills, but these 2 skills are human and technology skills. So I'll break those down really quickly. Ironically, my dissertation topic at last year was preparation for a global economy, 21st century career readiness skills. And I talked about a lot of these skills that are a part of this next normal of workforce. So let's start with the human side of the skills. So the human skills are being able to embed inclusive practices, leadership, management, communication, negotiation, adaptability, that's a huge piece, clearly. Critical thinking, creativity. There's something to be said about being able to be curious and creative in your workspace. Problem solving, someone who can rapidly go through thought processes and make swift decisions that are, again, thoughtful. That's the human side. And then secondly, the technology side. And that's the ability to have project management, advanced data analytics, mathematics. Who would think a mathematic person from an education sector is just as prevalent and just as needed? Technology design, engineering, digital analytics, advanced IT programming. And so these are just some of the ones that came up from the study. But what I would offer as an opportunity for everyone is to think about how you can upskill or take some of those transferable skills. What I learned, and I'll give you an example, and then I'll pass the baton to Brandon. When I was at Monster, the job board, for about 7 years. And at that time, I actually had a hybrid workforce, not knowing, again, that this was a skill set that was going to be in demand current day. But I actually worked online and also in person. So now, cut to current day, when it comes to technology, when it comes to a lot of the things that we're doing online, I'm very, very comfortable in this space because I was able to take some of those transferable skills and put them into practice. So not only are you looking at your technical, your human skills, and your skills that you've obtained from your education, but also think about some of those transferable skills that may be hidden, these talents that could also be very, very useful.
Thank you. Brandon?
Yeah, what I would add to that is, I think in particular in the virtual environment that we're looking at today, companies and managers know that the managers are going to have less contact with employees, and so what that means is they need to know that you can be productive on your own, and that you can work in your capacity and do what you need to do with less oversight, perhaps, than what has been in the past. And so how do you communicate that? Like, how do you create that buy-in with your company or your institution or your department and your supervisor? It's a sort of managing up piece, if you will. And then the other thing, I think that oftentimes when we think about remote work or virtual work, and what I've discussed with clients is the sort of feeling is that you're kind of there alone, and that you're sort of in this isolated space, doing a job, sort of like almost like next to another person that's in an isolated space that's doing a job. And that's, and in some ways that makes sense, but that's also not really true. Like you're still, and oftentimes, working in a team environment. It just looks very differently, and the way you go about it needs to be very differently. And so hiring managers oftentimes are looking for people that can still find creative ways to be team players in their environment, because they know that they need a team aspect to their business, to their institution. And so can you still be a team player, and can you still connect and like I was alluding to before, engage in the work environment with your coworkers and with your supervisors? How do you do that? And again, how do you communicate that to them? How do you paint the picture for them in terms of like creating that buy-in that, yeah, like this person can operate with less oversight, but still in a team capacity, and they know how to do that. They know how to engage with what we have going on here as a community.
Yes, and also build relationships from a distance. So going back to what you were saying, Dr. Airies, and you're confirming it, Brandon, the human skills and the technology skills are really key. So next up, one thing the pandemic didn't change was the importance of networking. And we do that well at USC. But how did our recent graduates manage to grow and even expand their professional networks during the pandemic? Let's find out.
I think networking was really something to utilize, especially during the pandemic, because like I said, a lot of positions and a lot of opportunities were kind of limited from the pandemic, I think, because people were being like more cautious with the budget, or they're like allocating budget to these like online resources. So maybe they didn't have as many resources to like hire on staff. And like I said, some positions just weren't relevant during the pandemic. So really utilizing your network and connecting with people was a way to find new opportunities. So I think really utilizing your network is really important. Because I feel like people who are in certain areas also have more insight of knowledge of things. So it really provided that opportunity for me.
I'm definitely one who was very engaged with my class. I loved talking to people and getting to know them. So really honing in on those relationships was valuable to me. And then it helped me with those conversations that I talked with my classmates. They got a better understanding of what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, what I was interested in. And then when they saw an opportunity, they would always send it to me. Like as I continued my job search, I also reached out to a lot of my mentors. With the pandemic, it's also a good opportunity to reconnect with some old colleagues or people that you haven't talked to in a while, sending them like a quick note saying like, hey, just wanted to check in how you're doing. This is where I'm currently at, giving that quick update of where you're at. And then and then extending the offer of like, if you have any updates for me, please feel free to let me know. Also extending the offer of like, hey, if you want to chat and catch up on Zoom for like 15, 20 minutes, totally down.
Joining a teacher committee was great. Attending workshops and webinars online in the field of education was great. And some of those, what I would do when I would attend these webinars and workshops, I would gather names of potential employers and reached out to them on LinkedIn and tried to find an email to forward my resume and cover letter to them. And then I also wanted to just attend these webinars and workshops just to see what some of the top concerns are right now in the education industry currently. So in preparation for my interviews, I could bring up some of those concerns and share how I would address them in my classroom. I used LinkedIn more to reach out to as many folks as I could. I posted once a week on LinkedIn once I graduated of different lessons that I taught, my capstone project, shared in ways on how I engage students and increase student participation.
Again, more great insights from Whitney, April, and Melissa. I also love LinkedIn for networking. Airies and Brandon, what do you see as the challenges, but also there are opportunities that are facing networkers in our virtual environment and moving forward? And we'll start with Airies.
So anyone who knows me knows that this is my sweet spot. This is what gives me life. And so I like to say the challenge with keeping relationships, because to me, it's not networking, it's building relationships. And I have a term that I've coined, and I'll share that in a second, but it's keeping those relationships sticky. I'll say that again. It's keeping those relationships sticky, so that they can stay top of mind, or you can stay top of mind in their eyes as well. And so it is joining professional associations and being active. It's building. Some ladies and I created Jinga, which is a professional association at Rossier. It's keeping those relationships and having those peer-centered conversations. That's one part. That's the challenge. The challenge is keeping it sticky, and those are some opportunities to do that. I love the suggestions that the other individuals suggested. There's a term that I use often, and it's called connect agility. Connect agility. And that essentially refers to departing from emotionally latent networking practices where it just kind of overwhelms you. Because sometimes it is a lot for those of us who may be introverted or may not necessarily feel like that's the space where I can build relationships, especially online. And so it's moving away from those emotionally latent networking practices and really advancing towards agile, relationship-centered connections. That just essentially means that you are building relationships that are going to be long-standing, that you can go back to at any time. I share my story of most of my professional career, I've not had to actively search for positions because either people that I've built those connections have reached back out to me, or somehow we've kind of interacted with each other again. And so I've been able to kind of forge and build relationships accordingly. So I say connect agility is a key part to the opportunities. Now, this is a play on what one of the speakers mentioned, and that's about LinkedIn, but I would even take it a step further. Create your own blog post. One LinkedIn presenter I saw recently, and it's also important to stay active and engaged in workshops and presentations and keep yourself very, very learner-centered. She suggested kind of creating your own posting strategy. And she said Monday through Friday, where you actually had an outline of what you would do throughout the week. It was a success quote. It was motivational tips, articles, blogs, video, PR content. She even told us, just as a trick, the more you kind of comment or repost and things like that, it actually takes your standing on LinkedIn and some of these other social media platforms higher. And so I would just say kind of create your own strategy. That's an opportunity for building these connections that are agile, and also participating in professional associations and groups and making sure those relationships are sticky.
Oh, I like that, Airies, sticky relationships and connect agility. All right, Brandon, what do you have to add to that as it relates to the challenges and opportunities of networking?
Yeah, you know, one of the central design-based pillars is this concept of reframing and reframing your challenges. And so one way that I like to reframe the challenge of networking is a skill. And just like any other skill, you can develop that, and you develop that by practicing it. So like, for example, earlier in this session, Dr. Airies mentioned like knowing your pitch and what you want to be known for and developing that. You can practice that. That's something that you can be practicing and developing and scripting out for yourself. So that way, when you kind of get into these networking spaces, you feel a little bit more comfortable because you know what you're bringing and what you want to bring to employers and how you want to communicate to them. And even if it's not just employers, because networking isn't just about talking to hiring managers or people who can directly give you a job. It's also about talking to people who can just give you information or people who you can share information with. And so, don't limit yourself to just thinking, okay, like, how do I get myself in front of a hiring manager? Because sometimes it doesn't work as directly as that. So I also want to kind of like allude to the challenge that like so many people just don't know where to start with networking and where to find networking opportunities. And that can be challenging. I think it's particularly a challenge for first generation college graduates who haven't navigated a space like that before and aren't sure how to go about finding things like networking opportunities through professional associations or so on and so forth. And so it's just there's a sort of knowledge thing about like just knowing where to go to find these opportunities. And then I also want to make mention to the fact that accessibility is a real issue when it comes to networking. Some of the networking opportunities are very expensive, and that creates a barrier to some of the workforce in terms of getting the opportunity to network and get themselves in front of people and give their pitches. And so it creates a little bit of a disparity there. With that said, there are still other opportunities that are out there to utilize, such as LinkedIn has been thrown out, and it's definitely a valuable resource. But outside of that, I think that Dr. Airies really nailed it. So
wonderful, thank you, Brandon and Dr. Airies. And I would just add too, I was helping somebody recently who wants to get in the gaming industry. And we found some industry groups on Twitter that specifically focused on the gaming industry and what this person was interested in. So I think that's great. And also following companies you admire. Dr. Airies said, repost and things like that. Companies or organizations that you want to work for, follow them, because you never know where that's going to end up as well. So my next question, and I do want to encourage our participants to put their questions in the Q&A section. of the webinar. We're going to take audience questions shortly. But the next question that I have for Dr. Airies and Brandon is, now that we're in, I mean, many people have accepted jobs not having seen the building, the office, not having interacted face-to-face with people. So at this point, you know, virtual recruitment process is completely kind of upended. How do you advise candidates when they are going through a totally virtual process to make a sound decision as it relates to, okay, I'll take job number A or job number B and feel like they have all the information they need to before accepting the job? And we'll start with Brandon this time.
That's a great question. And to again quote Dr. Airies, you are the prize. So remember, you know, I mentioned reframing before, and oftentimes it's easy to approach that decision-making process with, okay, how do I gather information on these different roles and these different companies and things like that? I like to advise people to reframe that to starting with yourself. How do I develop, or how do I identify the things that really matter to me? And then base my decision from there and work out from there. So it's important to kind of start assessing for yourself, what are my values? What are my goals? What's physically or tangibly important to me? And then what's more like abstractly important to me? And then start doing your research with those things as sort of your guide, your North Star, as opposed to doing it the other way around, because then it can get confusing. You can gather a lot of great information, but not know what to do with it, because you haven't started with yourself and knowing what you want out of this process. And then things start to kind of unfold a little bit easier for you, and you start to be able to make a little bit clearer decisions, because ultimately, again, you are the prize. And you know, when you get to a point where you have a job offer, it's up to you to accept or to reject that. But it's important to be able to know where to start. And it's always useful to start with yourself, and then base the research that you gather on the opportunities and the companies based on the information that you have on yourself.
Dr. Airies? Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, I would definitely +1 twice, Brandon, and just add, you want an organization that will honor and validate your unique lifestyle, circumstances, and experiences. And so when you're kind of going through this research process, interview some of the employees. I mean, I'm very bold in how I approach my decision-making. So I want to be informed. And so I'm interviewing the people that work there. I'm looking at publications, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Even the top companies have bad. So look at the whole spectrum. And then going back to you are the prize, negotiate. I'll share a story really quickly from one of my students. She actually, her name is Anna. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, and I'll put my LinkedIn link in the chat, but she, top student, in education, in marketing, great background, all these bells and whistles, doing all the right things. But she was in a situation where she was trying to decide what opportunities were best suited for her needs. And so she had about, like, at 1.5 offers. When she went from 0 to 5 offers, and I told her that would happen because, again, she validated herself, she honored herself, and she recognized that she was the one that was worthy of, again, of that opportunity. And so the short outcome from that story is that as a result of the outcome, as a result, I should say, of that scenario, she actually posted from her experiences what happened during her journey, her career journey. And the company, and this is key, the company actually reposted and validated, again, her experiences by liking it and making a comment. And so it is important to have an organization that is able to see your strengths, see your worth, and also honor that by visibly making that very known and making sure that others understand that, again, you are bringing a value to their institution and their organization. So that was the outcome. It was a really, really cute story. Again, her name is Anna. If you see or read anything on my LinkedIn post, I would highly encourage you to take a look at that, but do your research for sure.
Wonderful, wonderful. And lastly, and I see we have one question in the Q&A. Again, Feel free to put your questions in. You can put them in anonymously as well. Lastly, what should employees consider when starting a new job in a completely virtual or hybrid work environment? And we'll start with Dr. Airies.
So this one is again, going back to what we shared before, but I'll give you some concrete questions that you can actually go in and ask before you even start. So you want to know what resources will the company provide in order for you to have full capacity to do your job effectively. So by asking that question, you're giving them an opportunity to respond with what are some of those technical or otherwise resources. If they can't give you a concrete list, then here's a list, a kind of a short list that you can start off with. Will they help you with, or provide, I should say, Wi-Fi or internet connection? And I'm talking about the big dog, not just basic internet, but so that you can, again, be able to go online efficiently without any interruptions. Phone connections, and this is cell phone, hardline, whatever it is that you use. Microphones, lighting is important. Toggles, there's all these toggles where you can plug in different inserts. Monitors, multiple monitors, office supplies, printers. If it's a hybrid workforce, transportation to and from work. Yes, people do pay for that. Companies do pay for that. School institutions do pay for that. Flex days. How are you going to address my wellness, my well-being, my burnout? Are you going to have any type of virtual opportunities for me to do exercising? I mean, that's real. I actually wrote an article from my business school, and I shared that there's a need to do walk-in talks. So we're so inundated with all of these meetings, and for those that may be online, you want to take control of your time. And that means I just don't feel like doing another Zoom or doing something that's going to make me have to be present in this capacity. So how about we just take a walk and talk and engage in the same conversation, but in a different type of format? I'll finally say Gallup had a poll, an article, and they talked about the 4 C's of going back to work. And it was connection, collaboration, creativity, and culture. So I won't go into the detail because I want to hear from Brandon, but take a look at that poll. It's from Gallup. It's called the 4 C's of going back to work. And that's also a really helpful tool.
I think what I would add is know what the expectations are of you as you come into your role. I think sometimes what can happen nowadays, especially, is that roles are different in terms of the way like their functionality happens in practice. And then what our expectations are not always up to date or aligned with how they actually function now. We might be thinking about like the roles and how they would ordinarily operate prior to COVID, and base our expectations on that when that may not be the case anymore. So it's important as you go into a new role, especially these days, always, but especially now, I think, to be clear on what your employer is expecting of you. And then also to be clear on what you're expecting of them. I think another important thing that you should kind of like be aware of as you go into a new role is your goals matter. And if you don't remember that, if you don't take into account your goals, you will eventually hit a point where you're not happy, and you're kind of feeling stressed, or something's not quite fitting or not quite working. And it's because you haven't taken into account your goals and how you want to grow in this position. And it's important to write that down, build in a plan that you can kind of step through piece by piece over time, in order to kind of hit those milestones and hit those goals. So that way you feel like you're progressing in your role, and you're doing things that are fulfilling you as well, and not just going to work every day. So it's important to remember that you have goals as well, and that your well-being in this partnership is essential. It's important. Otherwise, the partnership won't last. So remember that. I think I would also say, remember to engage. I feel like I keep bringing that up, but talk to your coworkers, talk to your supervisors, get to know the people around you. Lori, you mentioned earlier about building relationships. That's really helpful. For one, it's functional for your role and for your job, but it's also really helpful in terms of sustaining your morale and your motivation and feeling at home sort of in your role and in your company and in your institution or wherever it is. So engage, build relationships. It looks weird and it's difficult and it can be challenging and whatnot these days in particular, but it's still important, it's still useful. So engage, build relationships, know the expectations, and then also don't forget that you have goals coming into the role that are going to sustain you.
Thank you, Brandon and Dr. Airies. And I would just say, add a few more things to that in terms of accepting an offer virtually or in person. During the interview process, look for the red flags that come up. There may be some red flags, there may be comments, maybe it's something having to do with how they're recruiting you or different things like that. And I think that goes back to Dr. Airies, what she was saying about values and do their values align with your values. Also, we know the statistics are out there that people leave jobs because of the boss. So this interview being a dialogue and not a monologue, you really need to read who your potential boss would be and say, is this somebody that I think I could work with? And then a question that I always tell job seekers to ask when they're in an interview process or assessing whether they want to accept a job is, what would you like to see this person accomplish within the first year? Because if they want you to go to the moon and back and circle it a couple times, maybe that's, if you don't have the energy and the bandwidth for that, maybe that's not the best opportunity for you. So that's another piece that I wanted to add in there. And then what's your general feeling about the whole experience? Are these people at this employer making you feel like they really want you? Because if they're invested in your success, you're going to be happier, you're going to meet your goals, and hopefully have well-being as well. So with that, we have a couple of questions here in the chat. And I'll start with the first one for our panelists, which is, what tips do you have for coaching first-generation graduates starting new jobs remotely in terms of navigating a new professional setting, meeting people, and in general, first-gen graduates? What advice would you give them? How can they be their best self and be a great success? We know they're Trojans, so they're going to go high, but how else can we advise them? And Brandon, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I work with a lot of first generation students and graduates and alum. And one of the things that is important to me is to tell you to buy into yourself. Like, you have earned your spot on the team, like you've earned the right to be here. And that doesn't just mean that you've earned your job, you've earned everything that comes with that as well. And so that includes the right to have your voice be heard and have your concerns be heard. That includes the right to ask questions to your supervisors, to your coworkers. And I mean this in a professional sense, but I also mean it in a social relationship building sense and a personal sense as well. You've earned what comes to that. And so take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves in terms of relationship building. I mentioned a little bit earlier about how it's functional for your job, but it's also helpful in sustaining you in terms of your morale and motivation as you move forward in your role.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brandon. Dr. Airies?
I would just say I was a first gen as well. I went through, also on top of that, I also went through, prior to entering undergrad, I went through summer bridge and triage programs and inroads and all the things that help, again, those of us who are coming from underserved populations to succeed. And so what I would offer as an opportunity is to make those connections with people who are coming from similar stories. And so sometimes those stories, those people can actually share their roadmap or their blueprint as to how they've been able to navigate through some of those challenges. And then finally, I'll say, just going back to, just say I've never done this before. This is my first time starting the job. I don't know what to do, who to talk to in terms of relationship building. I would say take a chance to connect with people who don't necessarily look like you as well. Those can be the biggest advocates and biggest mentors, coaches, advocates, advisors, sponsors, etc. And these are institutional agents, a term I learned at Rossier. But these are institutional agents that really kind of support you in your journey. And so I say, take a moment, send an email, send a message. I just want to take 5 minutes of your time to hear your story. You will be amazed at how many people who will reply genuinely because they want to give back or share or connect. And so again, connect with people who are outside of your norm, build those relationships organically, go back to your roots. If you come from these types of environments, make sure you go back and find people who have similar stories, but also find people who can bring a different perspective and different lens, and ask for those 5 minutes on their calendar.
I love that advice, Dr. Airies and Brandon. Excellent, excellent advice. And I'd say too, look at if it's a big enough organization, look for the USC Trojans, because they also can be helpful in the job when you accept that job. Okay, so another question that we have for our panelists is, if an applicant is looking on making a career change, what advice would you give to that person? For example, their work experience is in A category, and now the applicant went to grad school and they want to look for a career in B category. So what advice do you give to career changers? And we'll start with Dr. Airies.
So that is exactly what I did. So I am a business professional practitioner, whatever you would want to call it. And so when I stepped on foot of Rossier's campus and USC's campus, I had never worked exclusively in the education sector. And so what I would offer as someone who's making that transition from, in my case, business sector, traditional business, corporate sector, to the education sector and building my own business, I would say link up with people who know more than you know in that space. And so what I did was I connected with educators, and I was very inquisitive, and I was transparent with the fact that I didn't know much of what they were sharing in class, and also some of the terminology that they were using in class. And so I would say connect with people who know more than you in terms of experiences. Bring again that level of expertise that you had in that A position into the B position. I always say some of those skills are transferable. So I thought, me being a business person, I wouldn't have any connection or relatability with those that are from the education sector. Quite the opposite. It was actually, we had the common thread of passion for developing our workforce and making sure that students were ready for entrance into the workforce. And so I drew upon that level of expertise that we both shared. And then they also drew upon my expertise. Like, they were anxious to hear the stuff that I learned throughout my professional experience. So it's an information exchange. It's just as much a chance for you to get to know them as it is for you to get to know, for them to get to know you. So leverage your skills coupled with their skills.
Excellent. Brandon?
Yeah, this is a very personal experience for me as well. Like my entire undergraduate experience was done in math and engineering sciences, and computer science, computer engineering, all that kind of stuff was my whole jam throughout the entirety of my undergrad. And then I totally pivoted into started doing education things. And then now I pivoted again to doing career-focused work. It's tricky, you know. I want to be honest and say that, you know, it can be tricky and it can be challenging and confusing. And so I would say, you know, get with somebody who has gone through similar things and can give you sort of like guidance on how to navigate it a little bit, just from like an emotional standpoint, is really useful. I'm a huge proponent of, like, if you have access to therapy, talk to a therapist about it. It can be really helpful in terms of just processing the emotion that comes with it and the difficulty that can come out of that. And then also, it takes time sometimes, you know, that sort of thing doesn't happen overnight, and that's okay. Like, you know, if it takes you a year or a couple years, just know that that's not an abnormal thing. So, you know, you're not on the late freight or anything like that. And then also, it's helpful to do some skill building, do some intentional skill building. There are some free online courses that you can take that will help you kind of get a more practical grasp on your new field. There are people who you can talk to that can help you get volunteer experience and things of that nature. So take your time, build yourself a plan to go through it so that you're not just sort of randomly grasping at straws and swinging in the dark and hoping to connect it with something. Build yourself a plan that feels manageable and breaks it down into pieces so that way you can step through it little by little and celebrate your milestones in it. Because you will have milestones in it. If you want to do it, it's totally doable. It's something that you can definitely manage. But break it down and give yourself some expectations that are going to be helpful to you and useful to you.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Dr. Airies. So our final question, because I'm mindful of time, we end at 1:15, is, and this is a very interesting question. So I'm going to be intrigued to hear how you all answer this. If you've connected with someone from USC via LinkedIn for a job, but are getting some negative vibes about the role, what I talked about earlier, would you still take the job if you got it? I feel like I owe this connection a yes answer to take the job if I'm offered. Dr. Airies, what do you think?
So let me first go back to the person that asked the original question and just simply say, I want to celebrate you and congratulate you for, first of all, taking the step towards your goals and your passions. And so I just want to honor you and celebrate you in that regard. And I think this response is going to semi-answer the question that's in front of me, and that is about you don't owe anyone but yourself. And so to be in a situation where you feel like you're obligated, how are you honoring yourself? I'll tell you something someone told me. I went through the KPMG PhD project at the time, and I was grappling between, do I go to continue down this business route? I'm this corporate person on the track for CDO for all these companies, or do I follow my passion, which is what I wanted to do? And so one person said something that was she just dropped the mic, basically. She said, if you don't do it now, then when? And she said, you have to do it for yourself. And she said, no matter what, time will continue to go. And so no matter what time, you're going to have time to elapse. So it's important for you to kind of be mindful of what's important to you. So my response is to look inward and lead inward and think about what's important to you, not about what that person believes is an outcome or even with that relationship. I don't necessarily think that you will have and I think a part of it is, I feel like I owe this connection a yes answer. You don't owe anyone an answer but yourself. What you can do is politely decline if that's not an opportunity that you want to take, and then trust your gut and trust your instinct.
Excellent advice, Dr. Airies. Brandon, do you have something to add to that? And I think we have one more question.
Personally, if I was getting bad vibes from it, I wouldn't take it. And the reason why is because, this is your life that we're talking about here. And, you're going to spend a significant portion of your life at your job. And if you feel like something is off from the jump, that's a sign. Lori talked about red flags and identifying those as soon as you can and early on. And if you've identified those, that's a good thing. That's a good thing that you've keyed in on that. And it's okay to honor that. And it's true, you don't owe them anything. And I'll also acknowledge that it's easy for us to sit up here and say that because it's not our relationship. It's yours, and there's probably some concern over minding and honoring the relationship. But again, ask yourself, what is it that I'm getting a bad vibe about? And is this the kind of relationship that I have with this person that I can talk to them about that and share what's causing that sort of that bad vibe, and maybe you can get a little bit more information about it and tease out that vibe a little bit more. So, you know, if you're feeling that vibe, I would say, you know, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and listen to it. And it's also fair to check in with that person to kind of like tease out, you know, what you're feeling, and to see if you can gather a little bit more information. But yeah, it's a dubious thing, let's say.
Yes. And this last question is a really, really good one. And I want to ask it. So many times we have people who have had great careers in their lives, and they have the qualifications, and they're, in quotes, they're sometimes seen by the employer as overqualified. What advice would you give to a job seeker who is saying, no, I really want this job. I don't want the director job. I want this job. How can they convince that employer? And we'll start with Brandon.
This is a really good question. I think that, like, ultimately, like when it comes to job seeking, the key variable is value. The employer is assessing you for the value that you can bring to their position, to their department, whatever it is. And you're kind of doing the same thing. You're assessing the value of the role to you. And so I like to advise people to always start with figuring out how to communicate your value in that role, and why having you in that role is going to be really beneficial to them and really valuable to them in terms of facilitating it moving forward. And then script out how you being in that role is going to be more beneficial than competition, or more beneficial than even being in a higher role. And what motivates you to want to do that. Motivation is one of the top 5 factors in terms of hiring. And so hiring managers are always assessing people for their motivation. So script those things out and be able to communicate them. And remember that, like, you bring real value to that role. You're not having some sort of like ulterior motive. Like, this is actually really functional and useful to them.
Yes, thank you so much, Brandon Johnson and Dr. Airies Davis, for these wonderful pearls of wisdom that you've dropped on us today. How has the pandemic changed the job search? You addressed it so well. I know we'll have tons of Trojans who will listen to the recording afterwards. And we always like to say at USC, what do we like to say with our 2 fingers? Fight on, everybody. Fight on, and thanks for coming. Share this with all of your network, this very great session. Thanks.